Hello again. As you may or may not know, I am Eli the Computer Guy, and INE has invited me down to their Durham, North Carolina office so I can interview real network professionals and talk about their careers and how they got to where they are now. I'm here with Dedan Langston today. He is a senior network engineer at Duke University. Happy to talk to you.
Same to you.
So a senior network engineer at Duke University. Like, what does that actually mean? What do you do on day to day?
As far as a day-to-day, a lot, but I said that senior as a title is unimportant. What's important is what they pay you. That's what makes you senior.
Okay.
So some people get wrapped up in that sort of title, but we don't have anybody junior.
Oh, you don't?
We
Really?
don't have anybody junior. Day to day can range. My delta from a day to day could be somebody can't get an Xbox on the wireless to interdomain multicast routing. That's literally been my delta one day over one day. Like I was doing one thing in the morning, and I was doing the other thing by lunch.
Right.
So it runs the entire gambit of route switch in the course of a day.
So how many people are on your network team then?
I think we just went to 5. We've been as small as 3.
Oh, really?
Yes.
How big is your net? So you're are you on the main networking team for all of Duke University or one campus?
Well,
or?
there's only one. The Office of Information Technology Network Services does all the route switch, data center switching, IP address management, firewalls for the entire campus.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
And you only had 3 until
We
recently.
only had 3 at one point. It was an interesting on-call rotation.
Really? Was that purposeful, or is that just how it worked?
Somebody left, and then I got the job, and then HR recs take time to churn out, and then you got to interview people, and then people say a lot of things on their resume that don't hold up in reality.
Right.
So by the time you find somebody who can actually do the job, it's been 2 months, 3 months. You've been running kind of lean.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. So how do you determine if somebody comes in to interview for a networking position? How do you determine if they actually know what they're talking about?
Well, on the phone screen, I feel like if you put it on your resume, it's fair game. If you put BGP on your resume, that doesn't mean that you connect to your provider with BGP and you've never logged into that router, but you know what it is.
Yeah.
It means that if you went in there and logged in, you would know what the syntax meant, how to make the changes that you were going to make. And I just feel like if you write it down, it's fair game. So I will question you about what you write down in detail. And then when you come in for the on-site, it's a little bit more informal as far as the questions go, but Duke is the only place I've ever been where they actually gave me a lab too.
Really?
It was fair. It was fair lab. It was indicative of the kind of stuff we do every day. But it was like, hey, sit down here, make this work.
Huh, okay. So what skills or like what are you looking for out of somebody that gets hired for your team?
The number one skill that we look for is, I think, do you know what's on your resume? Can you talk about it chapter and verse? Number one.
Okay.
Do we like you? I mean, a lot of people put a lot of weight on where you've been to school and what's on your resume, but if you come in and people like, man, this guy really rubs me the wrong way, then nobody's going to want to work with you. It doesn't matter what you've done and where you've been. And third, we look for somebody who's just willing to, you kind of get a sense for people just kind of talking to them like, is this just something they do for the check, or is this something they really enjoy? Because there's so much work to go around that you can't be like, oh, 4 o'clock, close the lid, I'm out. So that's kind of what we look for once we've gone through okay, did they just write this down, or do they actually know it?
Okay. So when you have these applicants, I mean, where are these applicants coming from? Do you use like monster.com? Are these people that you've met? Is this word of mouth? Or?
I think some of the best applicants we have been referrals, because you know people that you work with that you would want to work with again. So if we can get a referral, that's the number one thing. If you can get a guy who knows somebody's work ethic and their ability already, great. Other than that, we just lucked up a few times and just had decent things roll out of HR. But we've had a lot of not good stuff too.
So I mean, there's a lot of complaints that colleges and all that don't have a lot of money. So especially being around this research triangle with lots of big companies, Are you guys competitive with the local companies?
As far as salaries,
Yeah, salary benefits.
I cannot complain.
You cannot complain.
I
Really.
worked at another major vendor who starts with a C, rhymes with disco, and shall remain nameless, and they didn't pay as well for where I am now. So I
Really?
can't speak about state schools because they are held by state standards for whatever the grade of the job is. But I cannot complain about what I'm getting paid. I don't even think I deserve what I'm making right now, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah.
Because that's what you hear so much a lot. There's this complaint that if you work for educational institutions, you're doing good for the world, but then you'll suffer with a poor
I guess you just got to pick the right one.
So being at Duke University, do you see a career path there? Because it says you've been there for like 4 years now. So is this some place that you could spend the next 20?
We have a guy on the team who's been there for 23, 24.
Yeah.
He started out there at 18 working on the phones and stuff like that, and went from phones to datacom, and he's just been there ever since. I find that universities are one of those places where you can have somebody and just stay there for a decade, because the technology doesn't stagnate, especially the research university. As soon as you get, I'm sure as soon as they went from 10 meg, they wanted 100 meg. As soon as they got to 100 meg, it was gig. Now it's like 10 gig. We're pushing the limits of what our 10 gig links will give us during some peak level times, like now March Madness. So we're like, what's after 10 gig? Are we going to go 40 gig? Are we going to try to go straight to 100 gig core if we can? And of course, if all the budgets and all that sort of stuff work out. So it doesn't stagnate at all. I mean, there's always some new thing coming up that you got to figure out how to do.
Yeah, because I think that's a surprise to me. Because if the pay is well, and I'd also think you would stagnate, but you're saying the new technology.
There's always something coming along. And, like this morning, I was working on crypto. Tomorrow, I think I'm doing something around ACI, since we're talking about putting that in our data center. And then sometime later this month, I'll probably be in China dealing with our campus over there. So
really?
Yeah, there's always something.
Oh, that's interesting. So when you first started off, so if you look at your resume, so you actually started off as a pilot in the Navy.
Yes, I did.
And you spent almost 10 years doing that. So how do you go, I mean, like literally operated naval aircraft in high-risk, rapidly changing environments. How do you go from that to Duke University engineer? Like,
well, it's not linear, that's for certain. I didn't get out of the Navy and then get a call from Duke. So I guess, there was 9/11. 9/11 happened, the airlines started laying people off, stuff like that. Price of gas went up, so they just weren't hiring as many pilots. So I knew I couldn't count on it. I knew I didn't really want to do the things that I need to do to stay in the military, so I have to pick something else. And I was a computer science major, and military, anytime somebody finds out you can do something, that's what you end up doing. Like it was on detachment, I'd end up dealing with computers. I'm at the squadron, skipper's got a question, I'm answering it. The website needs to be updated, I did it. Stuff like that. So it kind of stayed, keeping my hands in it, though I wouldn't have called myself a professional. And about 2005 or so, my girlfriend, now wife, mentioned to me, like, hey, why don't you look into trying to get your CCIE? And I was like, I had no idea what that entailed, but once I started looking at the subject matter and it became interesting, I just kind of started pursuing that as my post-Navy career. And once you get out, though, you end up in that the IT security, not security, but the IT experience circular reasoning. It's like you don't have any experience, so you can't get a job, and you need the job to get the experience. And a lot of times people don't want to take a risk on somebody who hasn't done exactly what they want you to do. So the way I got around that was like I bought my way in. I guess there's two ways in. You can get in kind of through a kind of internship sort of thing, where if you just roll out of college, you start doing some subset for people and you learn that. So I took a job that I knew was kind of narrow with no real mobility that paid me less than I felt like I needed in order to get the experience so that I could get the next job. So you got to pay some dues in this field. It's not necessarily about what you know how to do, it's what people think you know how to do to a certain extent.
So then it says you got your BS in computer engineering then. So why would you go Because I mean, you know, it's all about creating the next Facebook or dog dating app. So why did you not go into programming? Why would you go into networking?
That's a good question, because I was actually a better programmer in college than I was an electrical engineer. Like, I'm terrible at math comparatively,
Yeah.
you know. But I started tailoring the tail end of my undergraduate as telecom anyway. This was when cellular was starting to get big. So my classes were about IS-95 and CDMA and GSM and all that sort of stuff. When I look back at it, I'm like, what fascinated me about that stuff was the ability for this thing and this thing, separated by God knows how far, to talk to each other and work as if they're sitting right there in the same room. And that's still what fascinates me about route switch. How I can take two things separated by 10,000 miles and trick them into thinking that they're connected by a wire. And then that enables all this stuff on top of it, to, you know, the telephones, the video conferencing, multicast IPTV, all that on a base of route switching.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm doing this instead of writing code.
Huh. Okay. If you had to do it over again, what do you do? Would you write code instead?
Nope.
No.
Nope. I would maybe spend a little more time in my, you know, I'm largely self-trained. I probably would have picked up a different scripting language than I did just to kind of automate more tasks. But I don't think that I would have been out of this field, I think, if I was a full-time software developer. It just doesn't, you know, there's so much work and this stuff is so hard that if you don't enjoy it, then you're either going to be bad at it or you're going to quit. And I'd rather quit than be bad at something.
Fair enough. So in 2005, you said you said you self-studied then for your CCNA. And all
Yes, I did.
So how did you do that? Like, what material did you use?
There was a fair amount of INE stuff. I mean, when I looked around at vendors, I'm like, who's got the most succinct stuff? You know, because there's a lot of old info out there. It's like, this is what's on the test. This is what people are doing. I was like, I found that the INE stuff was relevant at the time. So I used a lot of their workbooks. And then a lot of the stuff was me buying the hardware and then going through the like the official study guides and stuff, and then trying as best I could to replicate the topology that I saw in there. And then make mistakes, be up to the crack of dawn, find my mistake. You know, I kind of find that invaluable, actually dealing with the actual hardware, because now I was able later in my career to catch errors that I knew were hardware errors because I'd had to take the cover off myself and like, oh, that's a bad stick of RAM. I know exactly what that is. So that helped. Didn't help my wallet, but it helped my progression.
So I guess there's a lot of options now. So I mean, back in the day, I mean, basically your option was buy a little lab. But so now you can buy a lab, or you can use a simulator, emulator, or you can use like INEs. You can rent their labs. If you were doing this now, would you still buy? Do you still think it's a good idea to buy?
It is a terrible idea to buy a lab these days. Oh, granted, you could probably buy it for a lot cheaper now than you could then. But at this point, I don't think you can replicate the current CCIE topology in real equipment. It's so the test has gone from what it was to something different now. So you would have to virtualize it in order just to get the full flavor of it, unless you want to work some subset of the technologies at a time. So no, I would not spend the money on actual hardware and cooling and remote access and all that sort of stuff and noise and all that. I wouldn't do that, but I would definitely, you know, whatever virtualization means that you're going to do, whether it's viral, Cisco modeling labs, GNS3, that sort of stuff is great because you can do it right now. Now, preparing for the CCIE lab, I would rent rack time. But as far as just teaching myself the technology and stuff like that, I would virtualize that. But for the lab, I would rent time just to be sure that everything works. It works the way it's supposed to, and I'm not engaged in negative training.
So you don't have your CCIE yet, right?
No, I've passed half of it twice. Half of it? Yeah, different half both times.
Wait, how does that work?
Well,
if you did
at the time I took it, there was a troubleshooting and then there was the configuration part. So I took the troubleshooting part and I missed that one just by skin of my teeth. I think you need like 8 of them, and I knew that I had 7 when the time ran out and it cut me off.
Wow.
And then the configuration session I passed. And then the next time coming back, it flip-flopped. I passed the troubleshooting section. The configuration section, I completely blew QoS. I had it right and then left out some part of it. And between that and I messed up a section on like HSRP, something stupid, really dumb. I just didn't put preempt on there. So that's 0 points and 0 points. And those 2 0 points combined to get me less than an 80. And that cost me a number, and I have not made another attempt since.
Do you plan to, or you just asked?
Well, I'm working on a master's through DePaul, a distance education program in network engineering and security, and it's only so many hours in a day. So when I should be done with that November timeframe, and when that's done, I'll probably pick it up again.
So I've had a couple of interviews today. We talk about the certifications versus degrees. And the other folks have been really focused on the certification. Seems like they would argue for the CCIE. So what got you into going for the focusing on the master's degree instead?
GI Bill.
GI Bill.
I had a benefit that I could not, in good conscience, just throw away.
Okay.
And because of the nature of the time that I got out, it didn't fall under certain characteristics of the post 9/11 where I could transfer it to a dependent. So I'm like, I have a benefit that will pay for me to get another degree. And I'm not going to do it because what? Because I want to come home and not do any work. I'm like, no, I'll do the work. And I just picked a field. I could have got an MBA, but I picked to kind of formally solidify the things that I knew through a degree field. Now, as far as what do I feel is more important, the certification. I don't think that this master's is going to buy me any additional salary points or anything like that. It might maybe get me an extra look if I apply for an architect job, maybe, but I don't even expect that. I expect people to look at what I've done and what I've proven I can do through certification above my actual academic degrees.
So you went for an online program, which is interesting because aren't we like tripping over colleges around here?
We are, but there are not a lot of colleges nationally that offer a master's program in network engineering. There's a lot that offer in computer science and computer engineering, but those focus on the more traditional computer science and computer engineering aspects, so to speak. It's all software development and stuff like that, and that's not really what I want to do. I think I Googled up maybe 4 or 5 nationally that I just cursorily found. NC State was one of them, but DePaul's entrance requirements were more realistic to me. They basically it's like, you tell us what you've been doing and give us references and talk about your work, and we'll tell you if you're getting in. Like, we don't care what your GRE score is or what your undergraduate GPA was, because it doesn't matter. You're almost 40. That was 1998. Totally doesn't matter what you had as an undergraduate GPA. And they look at that stuff and talk to your references and like, yeah, this guy's solid. Like, okay, then they take your money and you do the work, and hopefully after a couple of years, they'll hand you a piece of paper.
Well, there you go. So do you think, like, getting a master's degree, would you ever want to try to teach in one of the universities, doing instruction?
I had ruminated about possibly teaching at Durham Tech if they had an open position, because they seem to have the classes that fit kind of what I'm doing right now. Very practical, oriented towards specific vendor, not general, that sort of stuff. Maybe out there, but then it comes down to just time, because then I still have my real job and everything that means, on-call schedules and early AM, late PM changes, all that kind of stuff. So we'll see.
Yeah. Okay. So then the first kind of job, was that that Intron?
That was Intron, yes.
Yeah. And so how did you actually get that job then?
I went to the interview down in Mobile and impressed them with my ability to talk about the subject matter. And a lot of people rely on their resume and their experience going into an interview to carry them, but then they can't talk about the topics in detail. So I went in there in an interview and talked about timers and why addresses were a certain way and why this worked and why that worked in the nth detail. So like, this guy knows this material, even if he hasn't done it with this piece of hardware. And thankfully they gave me an opportunity to prove it, because they could have just said, yeah, he can talk it, but he hasn't done it. So let's talk to the next guy.
So then we're talking. So when you were in the Navy, you were on the West Coast, right?
Yes.
So then what brought you back? Like why this area in particular?
I went to NC State.
Okay.
And so spent a lot of time around here. I've got a couple of family members here. Got a bunch of family members in Greensboro area. My parents are still on in the same place that I grew up, down in Newport, North Carolina. And my wife's family is down there.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a no-brainer where I was going.
Yeah, okay.
And right now it would take me way more money than I deserve to dislodge me out of North Carolina.
Really?
As soon as I got out, I came back.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. So you spent like 2.5 years at Intron doing whatever that work is. But then you got hired as a network consulting engineer at Cisco.
Yes.
So how do you get hired at Cisco? Like, is that as impressive as it sounds?
I don't know if
it's
it's as impressive as it sounds, but the interview is just as hard as you would think that it was.
Yeah, okay.
And again, here's a guy who's been working at a vendor most people don't know. Intron served industrial customers. They built switches and wireless access points for terrible environments, high noise environments, stuff like that, automotive, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Learned a lot about layer 2 there. But I spent my downtime staying in the book because I wasn't doing very much routing, even though I was doing a lot of switching, a lot of wireless.
Yeah.
So it was just I was in a constant state of study. So when I filled out the on the website, applied to a professional network consulting engineer program that they happen to have, and didn't hear anything back for better part of a year. And then they just sent me an email that I almost deleted because I thought it was just here's another rejection email from somebody. I literally went in the spam and opened it and read it. I was just feeling masochistic that day. And I'm like, oh, there's an interview. And I went to the interview and I impressed the guys that were there with my ability to talk about the subject matter. Between that and the stuff the labs that I had done, either through vendor provided labs or stuff that I'm just curious, like, how does this work? I see this in this book. Let me go see if I can lab that up and make the mistakes and look at the documentation and fix it. And then I went to the interview and I was able to talk about that stuff, and that convinced them that I was a good fit.
So like with Cisco, how horrible are the interviews? You hear with some of these tech companies where it's like 8 interviews with 50 different people and jumping through hoops.
It wasn't like that. It was I had 3 guys at my technical interview.
Yeah.
Every one of them had CCIEs though.
Oh,
So you cannot BS your way through one of those interviews. You have to know the material.
Yeah.
Any other interviews that I've had with them since I left Duke, where I left Cisco, where I was contemplating possibly going back, none of them I feel were as in depth as that one.
Okay.
But they still, again, you just have to know the material. It's not enough to just be able to type the words and make it work. You need to understand how the protocols interact so you can reason through this stuff when you're troubleshooting. Because if you're an NCE or something like that, even though you're not tech, you're Cisco, and if somebody sees you walking down the hall, they'll grab you and ask you a question, and you try to give them the best answer you can because they're paying for your service. But other than that, I had a couple of interviews with managers, and that was it. I mean, at Duke, we do a phone screen, and if you get through the phone screen, then we bring you on site. You meet with the network team, the voice guys, manager, and if you get through the lab and we like you, there you go.
So then what? So you're a network consulting engineer for Cisco. So what do you actually? What does that do? What did you do when you were at
That
Cisco?
is the optimize and PDIOO. That's what it's supposed to be.
Okay.
It's you're supposed to help the customer who's focused, and I really appreciate what that means now that I'm the guy who's focused on stuff. Yeah. When you run a network and you work there, your job is keeping the network running. So especially if you're running a little lean on manpower, it's like we want to go from A to B, and we have to figure out how to do it and not break anything in the process. Like, which one of us here who's already pressed all the way, to the maximum, who's got the time to do that? And you make time sometimes, but if you've got an NCE, that person you can ask them, hey, we want to do this. That person can go out and figure out how to do it. They can give you recommendations on things that are best practice, and because you're only focused on maybe a couple of customers, you actually know their network. It's not like just being a regular consultant. You walk in the door, you have no idea how any of that's hooked up, what their caveats are, anything like that. And you give them what they paid for in a transaction or whatever, and you walk out. But if you're an NCE dedicated to a customer, you know the people, you know what they got going on, their protocols, and you can assist in them making things better.
So this is like, so they would pay like a maintenance contract and you were part of that then?
I assume. I tried to stay as far out of how much all that stuff costs and who was getting charged for what as possible.
Okay. So then, did you ever run into issues with that where they wanted more out of you than you could give, or wanted more than you were supposed to give?
Oh, yeah. I mean, people, like if you go on a transactional, they pay for a certain amount of hours, et cetera, and you try to write them down when you do your report, like to the best of your ability. But people always want more for what they pay, and if you're the type of person that enjoys this stuff, you want to give them the best product that they can get. So you might be putting in way more hours than what actually gets written down. Either because you lose track because you're like, I'm so close, I just figure this out, or you're like, I just don't know. I spent so long on this, I'm guessing on how long I spent on this.
So it doesn't sound like, were you happy working it? Like, was Cisco a good job to have?
Cisco's a great job to have. You will meet some of the smartest people that you will ever run into anywhere. Just brilliant. The problem with it was I lived in Maryland. Now, Maryland I did not like. Sorry if anybody lives in Maryland, okay? I apologize. But between the traffic, the rent, the fact that I think summer ends in, I don't know, August? Like the snow starts in September. Between all that, it was just too much for us. And,
so you went from here up to Maryland?
Yeah, I was working in Maryland. No.
But they have the Cisco. Don't they have some big?
They
Cisco
did, but
facility here?
my customer was kind of spooky, so I had to move up to Maryland.
Okay. That's interesting. So did you have clearances and all that when you got out of the military?
I had a clearance that was running out right around the time that I got out, so I had to go through the clearance process again in order. Not fun, not a fun thing. I don't think that I would ever do cleared work again because of how much of a hassle it is to actually do work sometimes.
Really?
Like if something's wrong with some complicated thing, say this is some CRS problem, you can't necessarily get a subject matter expert into the building even to help you with the problem, and you've got to sanitize what information goes this way, and in order to give it back to them and fix what the problem is. It was just too hard to do work for me. Compared to Duke, where we decide we're going to do something, we stand around cubes like, anybody got a problem with this? We kind of try to pick it apart. If it's going to work, then we put in our change request and then we do it. It's so much easier to do work in that environment.
Well, I mean, coming from the military and with the security clearance and all that, did you think about going into the government, doing governmental work?
I took the FBI test, and that is the most bizarre test you will ever take in your life. There's no math on it or anything. It's just kind of like some of the questions are like, read this scenario and pick the best outcome. It's like, best for who? Best for me? Best for, the guy's boss in this? Best for the organization? I don't know. I don't know. I think it was actually a Turing test, really. I think it's like, is this person a robot and will they arrest anybody? I think that's what the test actually was.
But you didn't look for like any like military?
Not really. And I don't know if that's just because it just didn't happen. I don't think it was anything conscious or anything like that.
So then how did you get from Cisco then to Duke? Did they poach you?
They didn't poach me. Me and my wife made the decision that we had been in Maryland long enough. And I tried to move within the company, and I don't think this is a secret, but the wheels of HR at Cisco turn really slowly. And I was coming up on lease renewal time and all that sort of stuff. I'm like, we need to make a decision. And I applied to Duke. They called me and asked me down for an interview. I went down and interviewed. I drove back. On the way back, I had an offer.
Really?
I'm like, okay, I'm out. It's like, if I had stayed at Cisco, if things could have happened faster. If I could have moved down to RTP and been back in North Carolina, and if things had moved quick, I probably would have stayed there, but they just didn't.
Was that, do you think you were such a good candidate, or is it hard to find people with your skills?
I think the combination of things that I now have on my resume are kind of hard to find. I mean, you get a lot of people who have worked in enterprise, but you don't see a lot of people who've worked with some of these service provider technologies that I dealt with. And because that's what we have deployed to do, we've got MPLS VPNs in the core. It's hard to find people that know that to interview them and then to get them on board. And I think by the time they got to me, they were actually so frustrated with being able to find anybody. They were just like, if he gets through the first part of the lab, if he gets through the switching part of the lab, we'll take him. You know, but fortunately I got through the whole thing and it just worked out to be a good fit.
So being there, like do you ever worry about the economy at all? Like they say with education, like the economy can hit it hard. Do you think you're pretty solid?
I hadn't really thought about it till now, thanks. I think there are probably so few of us in network services, and what we do is so essential to the mission of what the university does that you can't cut back but so far.
Okay,
I mean, I did have a little bit of existential panic when people started saying that SDN was going to change the entire world, and was going to cure cancer, and it was going to obsolesce every network engineer. I don't know if that's still the hype on it. People still believe all of that. I'm sure it solves certain problems for people with those problems. But as far as it eliminating the network engineer in its entirety and everybody turning a programmer, I've been around long enough now to see cycles come and go and hype kind of crest and die down and then hit that middle thing where this is what we actually use this for. So wasn't as much worried about the economy and getting the axe as I was worried about, like, is my skill set still relevant? And you keep learning and stuff, and I've had to keep trying to improve my Python ability and stuff like that, but not really worried about losing the job.
So how much, I mean, because that's the thing with the whole concept of SDN and software-defined networking, it's supposed to be, if it ever happens, really like a paradigm shift. So in the 10 years that you've been doing this, 11 years, I mean, are you basically doing the same kind of thing that you would have been doing 10 years ago? Have there been any real paradigm shifts in the networking stuff, or is it all basically bigger, faster, more expensive, but same?
Other than SDN, and of course, like as I was coming in, this virtualization was getting even bigger. I don't want to say it's just bigger and faster. There just seems to be more layers of abstraction on top of bigger and faster. It's like, it's either how can we make these 10 things look like one thing, or take this one thing and make it look like 10 things. And that seems to have been a lot of protocols and things that came out over like the last few years that enable you to do that. VXLAN and OTV, and I know I'm missing a few of them, but those things are like, well, we just kind of fuzzy up the underlying stuff so it all looks like something else. See more of that. And yes, a lot of bigger and faster. Like 6500s now, like when I came in this, it was SOUP 2T is the new thing. And now we skip right past the 6800 to the 7700 because of port density and backplane switching capacity and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, plenty of bigger and faster for sure.
So what's the time frame on a refresh cycle for networking equipment then for you guys?
For us, it's about 5 years.
5 years.
Give or take.
Is that a complete refresh? Do you still have things 10 years old?
There's still, like, our method has typically been moving it out of like the academic buildings and stuff like that, and moving it into ResNet. So the student stuff. So the students will be run on 100 meg, like 8-year-old 3750s or something like that, and those got replaced in other buildings by 3850s that we bought this year. So that's where we shuffle most of that stuff off in the ResNet that gets old.
So with the worries about hacking and security and all that kind of stuff, is there anything special, especially being in an academic environment where you have to worry about every college kid BitTorrenting things and all that kind of stuff? Is there anything special that you do in the environment to try to secure it?
Just security guys have plenty of tricks, and they run the IPS, so I can't say exactly what they're doing over there. But we've had a number of discussions about DDoS protection and all that sort of stuff because we've been hit more than once by DDoS attacks. You either making one group mad or another group mad, and here it comes.
Yeah.
We've looked at some stuff to help mitigate that sort of thing, and kind of our security guys going to deal with the scanning of devices, looking for compromised hosts and that sort of stuff. They're very proficient at it because, like you said, it's a university. So it's not really so much every college student trying something, but it's always something. It's the mission of it is to provide information and to be somewhat open. Like, how do you balance that between not being so open that if you're not the target, then you're an attack vector against another target.
Yeah. So do you guys have anti-hacking policies if some college kid was trying to hack the system?
Well, there's an acceptable use policy that we have out there that's written in stone. Everybody, you got to have one so you can enforce it.
Yeah.
Fortunately, we just have not had a lot of internal attempts at stuff.
Yeah,
Most of our stuff has been something was compromised from the outside, and we've got to remediate it, or it's an active thing from the outside.
Okay.
Now that will probably be allied tomorrow.
So looking at the networking world and all that now, if you had a kid that was going out to do this kind of thing, like what would you push them towards? Like what's the not necessarily the sexy technology, but what do you think is the technology that can get you paid for the next 5 years or so?
I am probably the wrong person to ask because there are things, I've reached that point in my career where the money that people pay me keeps me, there's nothing that I want that it won't buy.
Yeah.
So I'm not really as focused on what's the next thing that will get you hired, get you paid. I'm focused on what do I want to do next.
Okay.
But what I've seen even with interns is people want to jump straight to some subset. It's like, if I want to do security, it's like, how are you going to secure something if you don't even understand how it's connected and what repercussions your actions are going to have? Yeah. It's easy to say, go disconnect that or block these ports, but if you don't know because you have no route switch background that, hey, those ports are SIP, and that's a voice gateway, so no, I can't block it. I see a fair amount of that. If I was going to pick a technology to learn in addition to this, it'd probably be virtualization and storage, because having a solid understanding of that and RAID volumes and all that sort of stuff, when they start complaining about the application, it's not necessarily the network. It's like, well, maybe it's something a bit lower level than that. Maybe that's stored on RAID volumes, and that's the wrong RAID volume for that type of data. Yeah. So if you know enough about that to look at that as a possible problem, then you just avoid these red herrings over here. And I think that also would work quite nicely for like hyper-converged technologies. I don't know a lot about it, but in my reading about it, I was like, that sounds like something that I might want to do. So if I could get the cycles in my own day, that's where I would invest my time, is in UCS, VMware, and storage.
Okay. And then so since you were being a pilot in the military, as I always say, like in the mid-90s, if kids didn't know what the hell they were supposed to do in life, everybody was to go in the military and figure it out. Would you advise going to the military if somebody didn't know what they wanted to do or exactly how to get there?
I do not regret the time that I put in the Navy, but if I had a time machine, and I know exactly where I was the day that I signed up, I know what I was wearing, and I know the route that I walked to get there, I would throw myself in a trunk. And
really?
like, you were not doing that. I mean, I would not do it again, but I don't regret having done it. If you don't really have any direction, but at the same time you're not a complete dirtbag, then I suggest it. But I think people now need to realize that this isn't the 90s. If you join, you're going to war. It's not a possibility. It's going to happen. I can't, in good conscience, discourage anybody because I did it. I just wouldn't do it again.
Really? So I've never heard that from a pilot before. I thought all pilots were very gung-ho
the people, I met some of the best people. I mean, I miss those people, and I miss the act of flying. But I do not miss everything that was not those things, the people or the flying. No. I don't miss any of that at all. I don't miss the not having the freedom to make a decision that this is no longer for me, and just being able to do something else. I mean, but as far as the career field, I can't knock it because I did it.
Yeah.
You know,
And I guess the final thing. So do you have your CCNP then?
I do have an MP.
So you have this. So you went to CCNA, then you got your MP. Now you're going for your CCIE. So I'm not sure if we asked it. So you have your computer engineering degree. If it was a young kid, would you suggest they go for the certification or a degree?
If this is really what you want to do,
Yeah.
and actually my son asked me the same question. He's like, do I need to go to college to learn JavaScript? We're like, no, here's a book. I mean, this is the 21st century. I mean, you do not necessarily have to go to college to learn this field. It's a really experience-driven field anyway. So if this is what you want to do, I suggest learn the material, try to find a junior job. If you don't want to go to college, don't go, don't get into debt. Find a junior job, learn the field, and move with it. And if you decide later that you want to go to college, you know, again, it's the 21st century. You don't have to go to a brick and mortar, sit down in the classroom college. If you've taught yourself already, it's not going to be that hard, you know, to engage in online learning. And that's how I'm doing my degree at DePaul. So, you know, it's out there.
Cool. Well, is there any final parting advice you would give to people trying to get into all this then? Or getting ahead?
Let's see. I would not recommend this if you don't love it.
Really?
If you do not love the field, don't do it. There's always this push to push people into STEM and all that sort of stuff. But everybody that I know that's either good at this or haven't gone to other things are the type of people that were like, I have always enjoyed this. So if you don't do it, if you don't love it, don't do it. Don't even try to do it because there's a lot of hours. I mean, and you know, a lot of people see the Cisco guy on the documentation. They think, well, that's what I'll be doing. Like, no, I might have my feet in standing water tomorrow or a spider-infested closet. So there's some dirt involved. There's some long nights. There's some late mornings and a lot of hours. So if you're prepared to do that and you enjoy this, then you should do it. If not, steer clear.
Steer clear. Okay. All right. Good advice then. All right, well, thank you for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
Yep, so it was good talking to Dedan Langston, Senior Network Engineer at Duke University, who says, if you don't love it, don't even try, don't do it. So I enjoyed doing this interview, and I hope it was useful for you guys.